Chapter 9 of The Autobiography of a Newspaper Girl by Elizabeth Banks. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 9. Why I Did Not Become a Salvation Army Lassie. One of the last situations I entered in London during my search for working girl copy was that of laundry girl in a large steam laundry. It was not only the beginning of the end of the peculiar kind of work I had taken up, but was also the hardest task I ever attempted. The laundry was called a sanitary one, but it was in many ways a most insanitary sort of establishment. Upon the floor of the wash-house part of the laundry, where numbers of the girls, including myself, were obliged to walk up and down dozens of times a day, water, dirty, slimy, and ill-smelling, always stood to the height of several inches. Whenever I stood or walked in it, my feet slipped up and down in the water that penetrated into my boots, and so my feet, all day long, were always wet far above my ankles. I had every reason to believe that my lungs were of the strongest, and would stand any reasonable amount of carelessness on my part, but I contracted a hacking cough, which, happily, did not last long after I made my final exit from the atmosphere of soapsuds. While engaged in the work, however, I was constantly in terror of being maimed or killed with the machinery, and so, as I had given a false name and false address to the manageress of the laundry, I wore always in the locket round my neck a thin slip of paper upon which I had written particulars of what was to be done with me, should any accident befall me. But at the end of a little over a week's work, I left the laundry quite whole and as sound in mind and body as one could have reason to expect after such an experience. The writing up of the story of my career as a laundry girl was all done in bed, my typewriter being placed on a tea tray in front of me. That task accomplished, I was up again, and as it was not to be published for some time, and I would not receive any money for it till after publication, I looked about me for another way to earn some ready money. Again I made a tour of the London editors, with whom I had by that time become pretty well acquainted, suggesting subjects for articles of a different nature from that with which I had started my career in English journalism. They were kind, but they were firm in expressing their opinion that it was foolish for me to think of doing ordinary things in journalism when I had proved myself so capable of doing the extraordinary things. Then I attempted to get a position on some one of the daily or weekly papers at a stipulated salary, and though I was even then talked about and written about as one of the most successful women journalists in the world, I would gladly have accepted a salary of £3 or £4 a week, and I offered my services at that price to several editors in turn, each of them laughing at what he termed such nonsense. "Why," said one of these editors to me, "you have introduced a bright, new, attractive kind of journalism into London. Keep at it, and you should, without the slightest difficulty, earn an income of, at the very least, £1,500 a year." I was very discouraged when I left that editor's office, and at the bottom of the stairs I met a young English woman writer. "Oh, if you've been up there, I suppose it's no use for me to go and talk with Mr. Blank about one of the ordinary articles I want to do for him," she said laughingly. "I expect you came away with an order for a £500 series, didn't you?" I laughed. "No," I said, "not quite so much as that. But you'd better go up, and I hope you'll sell your article." She did sell it. I found that out the next week. Meantime, I walked over to the office of a paper that had recently been started, the editor of which wanted me to do some of my new kind of journalism for him. "Take some work from you, certainly," he said, when I had introduced myself. "Now, what haven't you done in London? I want something quite fresh and startling." We went over ideas and suggestions, and it was decided that I was to write up the Salvation Army from the inside, which meant that I was to become an army Lassie. "Don't go into it with the idea of an exposé," said the editor, "but join the army just as you became a housemaid, and write up your experiences." Then we arranged terms, which were, if I remember rightly, nearly 4 times the ordinary rate he paid to other contributors. "I will, of course," I said, "need a small amount of money over and above the column rate for expenses." "How much?" he asked. "Oh, not more than £3 or £4, I answered. "Very well, I will pay you £4 down now." Handing me an order for that amount on the cashier, and bidding me buy a uniform with it, and anything else I needed for the adventure, he bade me farewell till I should bring him my copy. Then I went out shopping, buying thick boots, such as I thought I should need for marching, and such other belongings as I thought should go with a humble Salvation Army girl, keeping intact an amount that I thought would be sufficient for the purchase of the poke bonnet and dark blue dress, which I thought I would not get until I had spent a few days investigating what was the best way to join the army. The next day I stopped in at the office of the editor of one of the most prominent and conservative of London's papers, and who, by the way, up to that time, was the only editor who had given me any encouragement to do a different sort of work from that by which I had made my name, he having even gone so far as to take 2 anonymous articles from me, paying me at his ordinary rate per column. I explained that I had called to see if there were anything else that I could do for him, but there happened to be nothing on hand just then. "I hope you are not doing any more of that new journalism now," he said. "Yes," I answered, "I am. In fact, I am just about to start on what I suppose will be the biggest thing I have ever attempted, and perhaps create the greatest sensation." "What is it?" he asked. "I can't tell you." "I wish you would tell me. Perhaps you ought not to do it, and if so, I might persuade you to give it up." "Yes, I ought to do it," I answered half defiantly, "and it would not be right for you to persuade me to give it up. But I will tell you what it is, in the strictest confidence, though I will not tell you the name of the paper I am going to do it for. I am going to join the Salvation Army and write an account of my experiences." I saw a look of horror come over the good man's face. He jumped up from his desk. "No, no! You must never do that. It would be a terrible thing. Promise me you will give up that scheme. It is not nice. It is not dignified. It will create a prejudice against you which you will never be able to live down." "But I must do it. I have engaged with an editor to do it," I answered. "He will pay me well for it." "Pay you well! He cannot pay you well, no matter what he offers you. I don't ask you who this editor is, but I do ask you, in your own interest, for your own good, to go back to him and tell him you find it impossible to do this work." The great man began walking up and down his office, and as he walked, he explained to me the enormity of the task I had undertaken. He told me I would ruin my whole future literary and social career, that I would prejudice all the religious people of England, and even of my own country, against me, and as he exclaimed, "I tell you, you will be ruined, 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 if you do this thing," I began to get as thoroughly frightened as though I had been about to commit a crime, and as I listened to all the dire consequences which he prophesied would follow in the wake of my proposed undertaking, my hair almost stood on end, and my eyes fairly started from my head. I was almost tempted to give it up, when I suddenly remembered the money that had been advanced to me for expenses, a good part of which I had spent and had no means of replacing. "You don't understand," I said faintly, "that I am in honor bound to do it." "How in honor bound?" he asked. "Oh, because I promised the editor," I answered. "Go and ask him to release you. That is quite a permissible and honorable thing to do." I was passing out of the door, frightened, bewildered, sick at heart. "Promise me you will not do this thing. Promise you will go to that newspaper editor, whoever he is, and ask to be released from this commission," he said, looking me full in the face as he shook hands. "Remember, you have come to the parting of the ways, and your whole future depends upon your giving up this Salvation Army scheme." "I promise I will give it up, and ask the editor to release me," I answered, and then turned and fled down the stairs, lest he should discover the tears I knew I was ready to shed. Then out in the open air I thought of the promise I had made with a sort of shock, and felt like a criminal who had taken a newspaper's money and spent it and could not return it, though failing, yes refusing, to keep my engagement. How dared I go and say, "I have spent the money you advanced me for Salvation Army expenses, and I have no way of paying it back, but I will not do the work for you." What did other people do when they were in such terrible straits? Borrow? Yes, I knew they did that, but I had never borrowed any money since I came to London, except the 7 shillings from Dinah, and I never intended to borrow. There were magazines in London at that time for which I had done some work, which had been accepted and for which I had corrected the proofs. I knew my articles would be published some time in the future, and that then I should get paid for them. Should I go to the editors, explain my necessity, and ask for payment before instead of after publication? Yes, that seemed the sensible thing to do. I started for one of the offices, climbed the stairs to the editor's room, was about to walk in, then turned and went down the stairs. I found I could not do it. I had courage for many things, but not for that. Then I went home and slept not through the livelong night. But in the morning I remembered a good Irish Catholic priest whom I had met in one of the mining towns of Lancashire when I had been sent there to write up the distress among the strikers' families. He had been very kind to me in those days, and on parting had said, "Remember, my child, if you ever get into any trouble and need any helping hand stretched out to you, just write to me. And see here, my child, I'm a poor man, but I sometimes have a few pounds put by. So if you're ever in need, just write and tell me." I wrote to the good father all about my troubles, keeping back nothing, and in the end informed him that I wrote as "under the seal of the confessional," and wanted to know if he would lend me £4 till the magazines paid up. By return of post the money came, and then, with it in my hand, I went to the office of the editor who wanted the Salvation Army written up, handed it over, and begged to be released from my undertaking. "It's all right," he said, when I began to make excuses. "I'm glad you've given it up. I can't say exactly why, but I'm glad." 2 months later I sent £4 10s. to my good friend the priest in Lancashire, £4 in return of the loan, and 10 shillings for one of his pet charities. And for reply came this specimen of ready Irish wit: "Money received. Shall be glad to lend you some more on the same terms. Little Mary O'Flanagan is the better for that loan to you by a new pair of boots, and I have instructed 2 other poor little girls to say a prayer every night for you." End of chapter 9.